The boy was skinny and quite serious for his age. Alaina thought he might be about 7. The girl had been watching the unusual visitor for about 5 minutes, but she did not call out to him. She looked at the boy and imagined that in just 3 years, her Jack could be the same age. He could have gone to junior high school and would have gotten straight A's because Alaina's son was very smart, and he was also a good drawer. She treasures her portrait, which Jack drew shortly before. Alaina felt the tears welling up in her eyes again and clenched her teeth until they hurt. She had to be strong. She promised herself for the sake of her parents, who were also taking the death of their little grandson very hard. But her husband Josh didn't seem to grieve that much. He didn't blame himself at all for what had happened. But Alaina had a different opinion. After all, if her husband had not left his 3-year-old son alone in the kitchen, lying in the bedroom with his phone, neglecting everything, Jack would not have choked and suffocated. Josh didn't even notice his son until Alaina came home from work and saw the breathless baby lying on the floor in the hallway. Apparently, he was standing at the front door with a cookie in his hands, waiting for his beloved mommy to come back. Right after the funeral, Josh announced that he was leaving Alaina. It turned out that he had a mistress for a long time, with whom he had been texting that night. Alaina herself doesn't know how she managed to overcome all of this. The apartment where they lived belonged to her husband's mother, so Alaina packed her bags and returned to her parents in the suburbs. To keep up her strength, she started looking for a job right away, and she got a job at a jewelry store near her home. She liked her job. It was very nice and peaceful. People are all different. Someone buys wedding rings. Someone buys a gift for a loved one's anniversary. Someone for his wife as a gesture of apology, and someone for a mistress. Alaina did not like the latter, especially when a glossy fat man waving a wad of money with a smug smile bragged that he had a young mistress whom he had spoiled. A girl could not smile at this kind of man, even though it was her job, and more than once, these womanizers had complained to Mr. Ronald Lester, the store manager, about her. Alaina was lucky that he knew her story and sympathized with her, and maybe not only sympathized. She had noticed the young boss's long, thoughtful glance on her more than once. No, not a dirty glance. On the contrary, it was as if he admired her or even cared about her. Alaina did not want it, and was even afraid to think about it and tried not to look at him at all. There weren't many customers that day. It was Monday, and there was a cold, drizzling autumn rain outside. And then this boy came in. He walked into the store, said a loud, polite hello, and began to look at the gold jewelry. Water was dripping from his red jacket, which was obviously too small for him. He must have come a long way, since he was soaked to the skin. Alaina thought he must be cold, but it was very warm in their store, so she didn't hurry the little visitor. She just watched him with a sad smile and thought of her Jack. "Miss," the boy walked up to her. "I want to buy earrings for my mother, at least the smallest ones. She never had gold earrings. My mom is very pretty, but my dad never let her wear jewelry. He even beat her when she put makeup on her eyes. He used to beat my mom and me very often." The boy furrowed his eyebrows and was quiet, and then he suddenly smiled. "But Mom kicked him out. She's so brave. It's so much better without Dad." He frowned again. "Except that Mom has completely stopped playing with me. I even was offended with her at first, and then I overheard her telling our neighbor that no one can hear her anymore." The boy looked at Alaina with eyes full of tears. "It turns out she was sick, and I thought that she did not love me. Miss, is there such a disease that cannot be cured?" Alaina had nothing to say to the child. She merely shrugged her shoulders. The boy shivered as if from the cold and sighed heavily. "So I want to buy my mother earrings. She will be happy and instantly get better. And I've been saving up money for a long time. I was going to buy myself a game console. Will this be enough?" And he took a small bag of money out of his pocket. Alaina saw some paper banknotes and a lot of coins. She immediately understood that it wasn't enough for anything, but she didn't say anything. She counted the money with a most serious look and hesitated. She could not tell the child that his mother would be left without a gift. Alaina resolutely took small gold earrings out of the display case and showed them to the little customer. "Will these be good? They are on sale today. You have enough money for that." The boy nodded happily, staring at the jewelry in amazement. When Alaina processed the purchase, he held out his hand and gripped the earrings in his fist. "Thank you," he whispered and went to the exit, but before the door, he stopped, turned around, and with a happy smile, waved. "Goodbye." Alaina looked long after him, and then pulled out her purse, took out a few banknotes from her salary paid in the morning, and put the money into the cash register. She did not see the manager staring at her from the back door. The next morning, a very thin young woman came into the store. She approached the counter, waited patiently until Alaina had served the other customers, and then smiled guiltily and handed her the very earrings. "My Branden bought them at your store yesterday." She suddenly shuddered. "Did he really buy them?" Alaina nodded, not taking her eyes off her face. The boy's mother looked familiar to her. She was very pale and slouching, and it was obvious that some disease was eating her from the inside. But her eyes, which seemed so huge now, were familiar to Alaina. And suddenly she recalled. "Kristen, is that you? Kristen Tate?" The woman froze in surprise, but then she faintly smiled. "Alaina? How many years has it been since we've seen each other? It seems that we live in the same area. What a surprise!" 12 years, Alaina answered. "We were in 8th grade when my parents bought an apartment in another neighborhood, and I was transferred to another school. I got married when I was 18 and moved away, so we haven't seen each other until now. And now I divorced my husband, came back, and now live with my parents again." Alaina sadly looked at her childhood friend. "And don't you worry about the earrings. Yesterday there was a great discount, so everything is all right. So wear it with pleasure." Kristen smiled happily, and even a blush appeared on her sunken cheeks. "Thank you, Alaina. I was worried about whether my son stole them. Lately, I can't really take care of him properly. I also divorced. I thought, finally, we will live in peace. I will take care of my son. But probably, it was not destined for me to be happy." The woman sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, I've burdened you. I'll go." Kristen put the earrings in her worn purse and headed for the exit. Already gripping the doorknob, she froze for a few seconds, and then suddenly turned around and, as if gaining courage, quickly asked, "Alaina, can you take care of my Branden for a while, for old time's sake? I need to be hospitalized, and I have no one, no parents, no friends, and no one to ask for help. I cannot leave him alone. He's certainly independent, but he's only 7, and I do not want to give him to the boarding school. He's so fragile, and it is easy for him to be hurt." Kristen looked at her former classmate with such pain and hoped that Alaina only quickly nodded her head. Kristen hurried, as if afraid that her friend would change her mind, wrote her new address and phone number on a piece of paper, said that she and her son would be waiting for Alaina in the evening to visit, and quickly left. After work, Alaina called her parents to let them know she would be late, went to the supermarket, bought some sweets, and was soon knocking on the old wooden door on the 3rd floor of a 5-story building 3 blocks from the store. She came home late and fell asleep that night only in the morning. Alaina remembered how she was horrified at the conditions in which Kristen and Branden lived. The apartment was clean, but the furnishings were so poor that she could not believe it was possible to live like that nowadays. While the boy was eating sweets, Kristen said that her husband was a very cruel man, often beat her and her son for any minor thing, and did not allow her to work because he was jealous of everyone. But he never gave her his salary. Sometimes he bought some food, but it was not enough, and they did not even talk about new clothes or repairs. Moreover, the apartment belonged to Kristen. She inherited it from her grandmother. But he spared no money for himself, and even found some money for alcohol. Kristen secretly went to the neighbors during the day, was cleaning and cooking for a penny, and can earn some money for food and clothes for her son this way. She used to buy clothes, tear off the labels, crumple the clothes, and tell her husband that someone gave them almost new clothes. And he was indignant, saying that they could have given something better, the stingy ones. Kristen herself does not understand how she lived with such a monster for more than 6 years. But when one day he hit her son so hard that Branden lost consciousness, she called an ambulance and threatened her husband that if he did not get away from her apartment before the arrival of the doctors, she will tell them the truth and he will go to jail. And he immediately packed up and left. Everything was all right with Branden, and Kristen filed for divorce the very next day, and soon she found a job. They were so happy that they would now live happily. But after 6 months, she had to go to the hospital with terrible headaches, where she learned that the beatings of her husband had not passed without a trace. She has been trying to fight the disease for almost a year. Doctors prescribed her treatment, prescribed expensive medications, but Kristen could not buy it, because first, she had to feed her son and buy him clothes. After all, he had not seen a normal life for too long. She bought some other medication, cheap, but it was not helping. So her disease had reached such a stage that the doctors directly said, "Kristen, maybe you have a month left, maybe a year. It depends on how the organism will resist." The only thing she was offered was to go to the hospital for a couple of weeks to support her health a little. She wanted to refuse. She had no one who could take care of Branden. But luckily, she met Alaina. The next day, after work, Alaina came to pick up the boy. Branden had already packed his books and clothes in a bag and a school backpack. He was telling his mother for the 10th time in a serious tone. "Listen to the doctors. If you treat yourself well, you will definitely get better. Don't drink cold water. Eat well. You need energy." Alaina watched Kristen smiling sadly, hugged her son tightly, trying to hold back tears. She did not understand how it was possible that the child and mother have to lose each other. Why had death taken Jack from her and tried to take a mother from Branden? What are they guilty of? "Miss, Alaina, don't worry, I'm obedient," Branden said as they approached Alaina's house. "I always do my homework, and I can even iron clothes." He was quiet for a while, and then suddenly he said loudly in a disruptive voice, "And my mother will recover because she is wearing my earrings." Branden began to live with Alaina and her parents. The boy turned out to be very kind and hard-working for his age. But he was sad. He missed his mother very much, even though Alaina took him to the hospital every evening after work. A week passed, and it became clear that Kristen will not be released from the hospital. She was getting worse and worse every day. And one night, Alaina got a call from the hospital and was told that Kristen was very bad, that if she wanted to have time to say goodbye to her friend, she had to come right away. Alaina looked at the sleeping Branden, wrapped him up warmly, and drove to the hospital. "I'm so worried about my son," Kristen whispered softly through her tears when she saw Alaina. "They're going to put him in an orphanage. Can you visit him there, at least sometimes? He has no one else." "I won't leave him," Alaina told her firmly, trying not to cry. "I won't abandon him." "I knew you are a true friend. Take this." She pointed to the piece of paper on the nightstand beside her bed, barely lifting her hand. "Tell my son that I love him very much." Having said that, Kristen closed her eyes and fell silent. Branden wasn't crying. He sat on a chair and looked out the window. Then he turned to Alaina and quietly asked, "Alaina, when will they take me away?" "No way." Alaina shook her head and squatted beside him. "I will not give a boy like that to anyone. I need such a boy myself. Do you want to stay with me?" Branden nodded quickly, put his arms around her neck, and then cried nonetheless. Alaina took a leave of absence, organized Kristen's funeral, and then she and Branden began renovating his apartment. The custody officers did their best to help Alaina, and the paper that Kristen left for her also helped. It was consent to the custody of her son. Branden gradually came to his senses. He was happy to help Alaina with the repairs, put glue on the wallpaper, cleaned up, and took out the old wallpaper. One day, when the boy came out of the apartment with a bag of garbage, a tall, dense man came through the door. He strode into the apartment in a masterly manner and stood in the doorway of the room. "You have done well for yourself, lady," he said with a drunken chuckle. "Have you decided to steal Kristen's apartment?" "No way. It's my apartment, okay? And the son is mine. If I go to court, they'll give him to me. And I'll re-register their apartment, and I can send him to the orphanage. Where's the boy?" The man looked around and saw his son entering the apartment. "Branden, I missed you so much, my boy," the man said in a whiny voice, sharply grabbing the hand of the confused boy and bursting out laughing. "Do you believe me, you little bastard? Hold still, or have you forgotten how I taught you and your mother to respect me?" Branden stopped lashing out and stood pale, with tears in his frightened eyes. "Let the boy go," Alaina asked the man. "Why do you need him? You do not love him." "Of course I don't." The uninvited guest continued laughing nastily, not letting go of Branden's hand. "I do not dispute it, but I love having an apartment. My own. So pay me a sum equal to the value of this apartment, or I'll go to court and take him away." Alaina looked into the boy's horror-filled eyes and didn't know what to do. She was willing to do anything just to keep this horrible man from taking Branden away from her, to leave them alone. But then, the man suddenly cried out, let go of his son, and grimaced in pain as someone firmly clamped his other arm behind his back. "Alaina, call the police." Ronald Lester's calm voice echoed from behind the father. I don't think they'll praise this impudent man for this blackmail, and certainly no one will entrust him with the child. After the cops took Branden's dad away in handcuffs, Alaina finally asked her boss, "What are you doing here?" "They told me what happened to your friend, and about the boy too. I was afraid you quit, and I just couldn't let you go. I couldn't hear or see anybody for 2 weeks. I couldn't sleep. Alaina, I can't live without you. I love you." Ronald blushed in embarrassment, then suddenly looked Alaina straight in the eye. "Marry me." The boy, who had been standing there with his arms around Alaina's waist, looked up at her, nodded, and said very seriously, "I wouldn't refuse to have a father like that. Not only would he not hurt us, but he would protect us from others. Maybe you should say yes." Alaina pressed her lips together tightly, grunted, and laughed out loud, as did Branden and Ronald. In the room among the sliced wallpaper were a man in an elegant coat, a girl in glue-stained homeware, and a boy with sad eyes that suddenly lit up with a glimmer of hope for a happy life. They were no longer laughing, just holding each other tightly as if they were afraid that some unknown force might separate them. And outside the walls of that huge building, other people at dinner watched TV, read, and talked. Some were happy, some were sad, and each had his own path. And whether it would be smooth or bumpy, long or short, no one would know until they had traveled it to the very end.